You want to know the strangest thing about that morning? It started so ordinary, so plain. That's the part nobody believes when I tell them. Nobody throws coffee at a man and expects the whole street to remember it years later. Nobody walks into a beautiful summer morning thinking, today is the day I'll see something I can never unsee. But that's how it works, isn't it? The big days never announce themselves. They sneak in dressed as Tuesdays. I was there. I saw all of it. And I still wake up some nights and play it back in my head, frame by frame, like a film I never asked to keep. Let me tell you exactly how it happened. It was late June in London. The kind of morning where the sky can't quite decide what it wants to be. There'd been rain at dawn. You could still smell it on the pavement. That gray, mineral smell that London does better than anywhere. And then the clouds had thinned out and a soft sun came through, weak but warm. The way English sun always feels like it's apologizing for being late. I was visiting from out of town, first time in the city. I'd saved up 2 years for that trip, and I'd planned every single day of it down to the hour like an absolute tourist, which is exactly what I was. My guidebook had little sticky tabs in it. I'd circled things in pen. My feet already hurt and it wasn't even noon. That morning I'd come to see the guards. You know the ones, the tall black hats, the red tunics so bright they almost hurt your eyes in the sun. The men who stand so still you start to wonder if they're real, if maybe they're statues, if maybe the whole thing is some clever trick to fool the tourists. I'd seen them in 100 photographs my whole life. I wanted to see them with my own eyes. So I went early. I wanted a good spot before the crowds came. I didn't get a good spot. The crowds were already there. By 9:30, the railings were packed 3 deep. People from everywhere. I heard maybe 6 languages in the first 10 minutes. A family from Italy, the dad lifting his little girl onto his shoulders so she could see over the heads. A group of students with backpacks, all in matching college sweatshirts. An older couple holding hands, the woman in a sun hat too big for the weather. Phones up everywhere, of course. A forest of phones. Everyone trying to capture the same picture that's already been taken 10 million times. And there he was. The guard. I want to describe him properly, because later it matters. He stood at his post in front of the black iron railings, perfectly straight, his rifle held against his shoulder. The bearskin hat sat low over his brow so you could only really see the bottom half of his face, the jaw, the mouth, set in a line that didn't move. He wasn't old. You could tell from his skin, from the way he held himself, that he was young. Maybe 22, 23. The age where most lads are out chasing a good time, not standing in a wool uniform in the warming sun, pretending the whole world isn't watching them. But he didn't move. Not a twitch, not a blink that I could catch. A bead of sweat ran down the side of his face. I was close enough to see it, and he let it run. Didn't wipe it, didn't flinch. Just let it slide down and drip off his chin like it was nothing, like he was made of something the rest of us aren't. There's a discipline in that you don't appreciate until you're standing right there. We talk about it like a tourist attraction, like a novelty. Oh, the guards, they don't move, isn't that funny? But up close it's not funny at all. It's something else. It's a man holding the whole weight of himself perfectly still while 1,000 strangers point cameras at his face. That takes a kind of strength most of us will never need to find. I stood there watching him for a long time, longer than I meant to. There was something hypnotic about it. And then the man in the green jacket showed up. I noticed him before anything happened. I don't know why. Maybe some animal part of your brain clocks trouble before your thinking part catches up. He was loud. That was the first thing. Everybody else around the railing spoke in that hushed, half-respectful tone people use in places like that, the way you lower your voice in a church even if you're not religious. But this guy was loud, laughing, talking too fast. He had a small group with him, 3 or 4 others, and they had that look about them. You know the look of people who'd started their morning somewhere with a bar in it. He was maybe 30. Tall, sandy hair, sunglasses pushed up on his head. Green jacket, expensive trainers. American accent, though I'll say right now that's got nothing to do with anything. I'm from across the water myself, and there's loud fools in every country on earth. He just happened to be one of ours that day, and I felt the embarrassment of it like a hot coal in my stomach. He had a coffee in his hand, one of those tall paper cups, the lid still on, steam coming off it. And he kept getting closer to the guard. His friends were egging him on, I could hear bits of it. Go on then. He won't do anything. Make him laugh. That kind of thing. Stupid talk. The kind of talk that sounds like nothing right up until it turns into something. He stood right in front of the guard, right in his face almost, waved his hand, pulled silly faces, said something I couldn't catch. The guard didn't move. Of course he didn't. That's the whole point of him. He stared straight ahead at a fixed point somewhere over the man's shoulder, like the man wasn't even there, like he was looking at something the rest of us couldn't see. The crowd was laughing a bit by then. Not cruel laughing. Just that nervous, uncertain laughing people do when they're not sure where a thing is going. A few people had turned their phones from the guard to the man in the green jacket, including me. I had mine up. I'm not proud of it, but I had it up. And then he did it. It happened so fast that half the crowd missed it. He stepped right up close, said something to his friends, grinned, and he tipped the coffee. Not through it exactly. Not at first. He sort of flicked it like it was a joke, like he expected a splash and a laugh. But the lid wasn't on as tight as he thought, and the whole thing came off, and the coffee, not boiling hot, I don't think, but warm, more than warm, went straight across the front of that beautiful red tunic. Down the gold buttons, across the white belt, a long brown stain spreading across all that perfect uniform in less than a second. The crowd made a sound. I'll never forget that sound. It wasn't a scream. It was lower than that. A kind of collective gasp, 100 people pulling breath in at the exact same moment, and then dead silence. Even the man in the green jacket went quiet. The grin sort of froze on his face. I think even he knew, right then, that he'd done something he couldn't take back. And the guard did not move. That was the thing that put ice down my spine. The coffee was running down his uniform, dripping off the bottom of the tunic onto his boots, and he stood there as if nothing had happened at all. Eyes forward, jaw set, rifle steady against his shoulder. A man wearing another man's mistake all down his front, and he wore it like he hadn't even noticed. But I was close. I told you that. I was close enough to see the sweat run down his face earlier, and I was close enough now to see the one thing the cameras didn't catch. His jaw tightened. Just a fraction. Just the smallest movement, the muscle at the corner flexing once, twice. The kind of thing you only see if you're looking dead at it. He was holding something down. Some huge thing, anger or shock, or just the pure shame of being humiliated in front of the whole world, and he was crushing it back down inside himself by sheer force of will. And he held his post. I have thought about that moment more times than I can count. A man wronged in public with 1,000 witnesses, and every single instinct in his body screaming at him to react, and he chose, in that half a second, not to. He chose the post. He chose the thing he'd sworn to do over the thing every fiber of him wanted to do. I didn't have words for it then. I'm not sure I do now. What happened next, though, that's where it stops being a story about a rude tourist. Because the friends of the man in the green jacket weren't laughing anymore. They'd gone the color of old paper. One of them grabbed his arm and was trying to pull him back. Come on, man, come on, let's go, let's go. The fun had drained out of it all at once, the way it does, the way you suddenly sober up the second you realize you've gone too far. The man in green was backing away, hands up, half a smile still on his face, the kind of smile that's begging not to be in trouble. It's a joke, he was saying. Relax, it's a joke. It's just. And that's when I heard the boots. You hear them before you see them. That's something they don't tell you. The boots come first. A hard, fast, rhythmic crunch on the ground, 2 sets, 3 sets coming from the direction of the gate. The crowd was already starting to part, people stepping back without quite knowing why, the way a tide pulls out before a big wave. Another guard was coming, and he was not standing still. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because the coffee, you see, the coffee was nothing. The coffee was the smallest, stupidest part of the whole day. It's just the part everyone films. It's the part that gets the views and the gasps and the shares. A tourist throws coffee at a guard, the guard doesn't move. Isn't that something? People love that. It's a tidy little story with a tidy little lesson about discipline, and you can watch it in 30 seconds and feel something and move on with your day. But I was there for the rest of it. I was there for what came after, the part that wasn't tidy at all, the part that turned that warm, gray London morning into the worst and the most important morning of my whole life. The part that no phone caught properly, because by the time it happened, everyone was running, and the phones were the last thing on anybody's mind. I'm going to tell you all of it. I promised myself I would one day to whoever would listen, because that young guard deserves to have it told right. Not the coffee. The coffee's nothing. What he did an hour later, that's the thing you need to hear. Let me go back a little. Let me set it right. After the coffee, the second guard, the one with the fast boots, he marched straight up. He wasn't running, not exactly, but it was the closest thing to running you'll ever see a man in that uniform do, and the difference between his pace and the dead-still figure he was marching toward made the whole thing feel like something out of a film. He came to a halt beside the man in green, snapped to attention, and then, in a voice that cut clean through the silence, sharp, clipped, every word like a door slamming, he said something to the effect of, "Stand back from the Queen's Guard." Just that. He didn't touch the man, didn't grab him, didn't need to. The voice did all the work. It was the voice of a person who has been trained for situations that this fool could not begin to imagine, and you could hear, underneath the politeness of the words, exactly how thin the patience was. The man in green nearly fell over himself backing up. His friends had him by both arms now. They were hauling him into the crowd, all of them muttering apologies that nobody had asked for. "Sorry, sorry, we're going, we're sorry." And the crowd let them through, but I saw the faces, and the faces had turned. There's nothing the British like less than someone who doesn't know how to behave, and the looks they gave that man could have stripped paint. He'd come for a laugh. He left with 100 strangers staring at him like he was something they'd found on the bottom of a shoe. The stained guard, meanwhile, still hadn't moved, coffee drying brown on his beautiful tunic, eyes front. I remember thinking, that's it then. That's the show. I remember actually feeling a little disappointed that it was over, which tells you something about the kind of person I was that morning. A bit of drama, a bit of a story to tell back home, and now back to the guidebook and the little sticky tabs. I had no idea, none of us did. The clock above the gate said it wasn't quite 10. There was a coffee cart maybe 100 yards down the way, near the edge of the green space, where the railings ended and the trees began. I decided I'd go and get a drink. Funny, isn't it? I just watched a man get a coffee thrown at him, and my first thought was to go and buy one for myself. The brain's a strange machine. I peeled myself out of the crowd. My legs were stiff from standing. I worked my way down the railings toward the trees, toward the open green, and I remember the sounds changing as I got further from the crowd. The chatter fatting. Birds suddenly. The hiss of the coffee cart's machine. A bus somewhere out on the road, its brakes sighing. A dog barking once and then stopping. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a city being a city on an ordinary morning. I remember a child laughing, somewhere off to my left. A bright, high, happy little laugh. The kind that makes you smile even when you're a stranger, even when you've no idea what's funny. I turned to look. A little boy, maybe 4, chasing pigeons across the grass, arms out like he could fly. His mother behind him with a pram calling him back, smiling. I want you to hold onto that laugh. Hold onto that picture. The boy with his arms out, the pigeons scattering up into the gray bright sky, the mother smiling, the morning soft and warm and absolutely, completely ordinary. Because that's the last ordinary thing I remember. That's the last second of the world as it was. I had just reached the coffee cart. I just opened my mouth to order. The man behind the cart had a tea towel over his shoulder and was wiping down the counter, and he looked up at me with a tired, friendly sort of smile and said, "What can I get you, mate?" And then the ground moved. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't like in films. In films there's a fireball and slow motion and music. This was nothing like that. It was a sound so huge and so deep that I didn't hear it so much as feel it, felt it in my chest, in my teeth, in the bones of my feet through the pavement. A single, enormous, flat crack that didn't seem to come from any one direction but from everywhere at once, from inside my own head. And then the air shoved me. Just shoved me like a giant invisible hand, and the coffee cart and the friendly man and the whole gray morning tipped sideways, and I was on the ground, and I didn't know how I'd got there. For a moment, I don't know how long, there was nothing. No sound at all. Just a high, thin whine in my ears, like the world had been switched off and left humming. And then the screaming started. The screaming brought the world back. I told you the sound had switched off after the blast, that high, thin whine like a kettle far away, like the inside of a seashell. For a few seconds there was nothing else. And then it cracked all at once and the noise came flooding in and it was screaming. People screaming. Not one voice. Dozens. Layered over each other, near and far, high and low. I was on the ground. I didn't remember falling. There was grit under my palms and a taste of copper in my mouth, and my ears were ringing so hard the world felt like it was underwater. I pushed myself up onto my hands and knees, and the first thing I saw was the coffee cart on its side, and the friendly man with the tea towel sitting on the pavement beside it, holding his own head with both hands, blinking, looking at me like he wanted me to explain what had just happened. I couldn't explain it, I didn't know. Smoke, that was the next thing. A thick, low cloud of gray-brown smoke drifting across the green from the far side, from somewhere near the road, near where the trees met the edge of the park. It rolled toward us slow and heavy, and it carried a smell I'd never smelled before in my life and have never been able to forget since. Burnt, chemical, sharp, wrong. A smell with no place in a summer morning. I got to my feet. I don't know how. My legs were doing things without asking me, and I turned in a slow circle trying to make the world make sense, and what I saw, I'll never make it sound the way it felt. People were running, in every direction. No pattern to it, no sense, just bodies moving away from the smoke as fast as they could move, and some of them falling, and some being pulled up by strangers, and some just standing frozen in the middle of all of it like they'd been turned to stone. A woman ran past me with one shoe on. A man stood completely still with his phone held up, still filming, his mouth open, until somebody knocked into him and the phone flew out of his hand and he just watched it go. And the crowd by the railings, the thick, happy, three-deep crowd that had been laughing at a coffee a few minutes before, that crowd had become something else. A single panicking animal, pushing, surging. People crushed up against the iron railings with nowhere to go. The railings that had been there to keep people back now keeping people in, trapping them, and I could see it turning bad. I could see the way a crowd turns into a stampede, the way the ones at the front go down, and the ones behind don't even know it's happening. That's how people die in these things, not always the blast, the panic, the crush. I knew that somehow standing there, and I think a lot of people knew it. You could feel it building. The way you feel a storm in your skin before the first drop falls. And then I saw him. The guard. The same guard. The one with the coffee stain. Brown coffee dried down the front of that red tunic, and now smoke and grit on top of it, the bearskin hat knocked slightly crooked on his head from the blast. But he was up, he was on his feet, and he was moving. I had watched this man stand so still for an hour that I'd half believed he couldn't move. I'd watched him take an insult across the chest and not so much as blink. And now, in the middle of all that chaos, he was the only thing on that whole green moving with any purpose at all. Everyone else was a leaf in the wind. He was walking against it. He'd left his post. I want you to understand what that meant, because at the time I didn't, not fully. Those men don't leave their posts. It's not a suggestion. It's the spine of the whole thing they are. They stand that ground through rain, through heat, through tourists shouting in their faces and flashing cameras and idiots throwing coffee, and they do not move because the not moving is the duty. It's drilled into them so deep it's past instinct. To leave the post is the one thing they are trained never, ever to do. And he'd left it. But here's the thing I understood later, the thing that took me years to put into words. He didn't abandon his duty when he left that post. He just understood, faster than any of us, what his duty actually was. The post was never the point. The post was a stand-in for the thing underneath it, the protecting, the standing between, the being the one who doesn't run when everyone else does. The morning had stripped away the ceremony and the costume and the tourist photograph version of him, and what was left underneath, when it counted, was exactly what the uniform had always been promising. He moved toward the railings, toward the crush, toward the worst of it. I started moving too. I don't know why. I'd like to tell you it was bravery, but I think it was just that he was the only fixed point in a spinning world, and some part of me decided to follow it. I went toward the railings, fighting the current of people coming the other way, getting shoulders and elbows, getting shoved, keeping my feet. The guard reached the crush before I did. He still had his rifle, I remember that, the dark shape of it, but he'd slung it, gotten it out of the way, and he had both his hands free and he was using them. Not gently. There was no time for gentle. He grabbed people and he moved them. He got himself up against the worst of the press, where the railings were, and where the people at the front were being crushed against the iron, and he started pulling them back, one at a time, hauling them up and out and pushing them in the direction of open ground. And he was shouting. That voice again. The same voice the second guard had used on the coffee man, but bigger now, harder, cutting through all the screaming, short words, clear words, the kind of words that get through to a panicking brain when nothing else can. This way, move this way, don't push, walk, walk. And the strangest thing happened. People listened. In all that chaos, in all that noise, there was one voice that sounded like it knew what it was doing, one voice that wasn't panicking, and people's bodies turned toward it before their minds even caught up. He became a point of order in the middle of the madness. The crush around the railing started to ease, just slightly, just enough, because there was suddenly someone telling the front of the crowd which way to go and meaning it. I'd seen a man hold still for an hour. Now I was watching him hold a crowd together with nothing but his hands and his voice. And I understood, finally, that the stillness and this were the same thing. Both of them were a man refusing to let himself fall apart so that other people wouldn't have to. It was somewhere in all of this that I heard it. A child crying. Not the screaming of the crowd. Something under it. Smaller. Higher. The specific, helpless sound of a very small child who is alone and frightened, and once you've heard that sound you can't unhear it. It cuts right through everything else like it's tuned to a frequency only the human heart can pick up. I turned toward it, and my stomach dropped through the ground. The little boy, the one I'd seen chasing pigeons, arms out, flying, 4 years old, the laugh I told you to hold onto. He was alone. He was standing in the open green between the crowd and the smoke, maybe 40 feet from where the blast had come, turning in a circle, crying, calling a word over and over that I couldn't hear but didn't need to hear, because every child in the world calls the same word when they're that frightened. Mummy, mummy, mummy. And I couldn't see his mother anywhere. The pram was on its side near the trees, empty. I didn't let myself think about what that might mean. I just looked at this tiny boy, standing alone in the worst place a person could stand, the smoke drifting closer, the ground around him scattered with the wreckage of the morning, and I felt my whole body go cold. I was too far. I want to be honest with you about that because it matters. I was a good 60, 70 feet away on the wrong side of a surging crowd, and even as I started toward him I knew in my gut I wasn't going to reach him in time. The crowd was between us, the press of bodies. I shoved forward and a wall of people shoved back and I lost a step, 2 steps, and the boy was crying and the smoke was coming and I couldn't get through. But somebody else had seen him too. The guard. He'd been at the railings, hauling people back, doing the thing that every part of his training and his instinct told him to do, the thing that was already saving lives. And in the middle of it his head turned. Just turned. The way your head turns when some sound finds you that your body can't ignore. And I watched him find the boy in all that chaos, the same way I had. And I watched him go absolutely still for half a second, the old stillness, the post-stillness. But this time it was a man making a decision. Because here's what that half a second cost him. If he stayed at the railings, he kept the crowd moving, kept the crush from turning deadly, kept doing the most good for the most people. That's the cold arithmetic of it, and a man trained the way he was trained knows that arithmetic in his bones. The boy was one. The crowd was hundreds. But the crowd was already moving now. He'd broken the worst of the crush. They had momentum, they had a direction. They didn't need him to hold them anymore. They needed him for the next 2 seconds maybe, but no longer than that. And the boy had no one. I saw him do the arithmetic. I swear I saw it cross his face in that half second, the whole brutal weight of it. And then I saw him let go of the railings and turn and run. Not toward safety, toward the smoke. He went across that open green like the whole thing depended on it. Bearskin hat flying off. It came clean off his head and tumbled away across the grass, and he didn't so much as glance at it. The crooked, smoke-stained, coffee-stained mess of his uniform, and underneath it just a young man, just a lad barely out of boyhood himself, sprinting flat out toward the one place every sane person was running away from. I'd stopped moving. I'm ashamed to say it, but it's true. I'd stopped, jammed in the crowd, and I just watched, because there was nothing else I could do, because he was so much faster than me and so much braver than me, and all I could do was watch and pray. He reached the boy. He didn't slow down to do it. He scooped him up at a dead run, one arm, the way you'd snatch up something you were terrified of dropping, and the boy's little arms went around his neck on pure instinct, and he kept running, kept moving, carrying him away from the smoke. His whole body curved around that tiny child like a shield, like a wall, like the last thing between a 4-year-old and the end of the world. And the crowd, even in all that panic, even with their own lives on their minds, the crowd saw it. I felt the change go through the people around me. A sound went up, a different sound from the screaming, a kind of cry that was half horror and half something else, something like hope, the sound a crowd makes when it sees one good thing in the middle of a nightmare. He was nearly clear, nearly to the trees, to where it was open, to where the boy would be safe. And that's when the second one went off. The second one was smaller. That's what they told us afterward, the people who know about these things. Smaller. A secondary device, they called it, and they said it like it was a small word, a technical word, but there was nothing small about it when you were standing there. It went off closer to the trees this time. Off to the left of where the guard was running, and the sound of it was sharper, meaner, a flat, hard punch instead of the deep chest blow of the first one. I saw the guard go down. I want to be careful here because for a second, for one whole, endless, terrible second, I thought that was it. I thought I'd watched a man run into the worst place on earth to save a child, and I'd watched the worst place on earth take him for it. The blast knocked him sideways and he went down hard, and the boy went down with him, and the smoke rolled over the both of them, and I lost them. I just lost them in the gray. I have never wanted anything in my life the way I wanted to see that man stand back up. And the smoke shifted. And he was up. He was on his knees first, then his feet, hunched over, and the boy was still in his arms, still there, still held against his chest. And the boy was crying, which was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard, because crying meant breathing, crying meant alive. The guard had taken the second blast with his own back turned to it, his body still curled around the child, and whatever it had done to him, it hadn't touched the boy. He'd made himself the wall. He'd made himself the thing the blast hit, so the boy wouldn't be. He staggered. He was hurt, you could see it in the way he moved, something wrong with one leg, a heaviness in his whole body that hadn't been there before, but he kept going. He carried that boy the last 20 feet to the trees, to the open ground beyond, away from the smoke, and there were people there now, people who'd gotten clear and turned back, hands reaching out, and he got the boy to them, pressed him into the arms of a stranger, said something. And then his legs gave out and he went down onto the grass on his hands and knees and stayed there, head hanging, shoulders heaving, finally, letting his body feel what he'd been running through. He'd done it, he'd gotten the boy out. I reached them maybe a minute later. The crowd had thinned by then, people streaming away across the green, sirens already starting up somewhere out beyond the trees, that two-note wail getting louder by the second. I pushed through the last of it and came out into the open, and there he was, the guard, still down on the grass, with people gathered around him now, and someone had given the boy to a woman who was holding him and rocking him and whispering to him. I got close, I knelt down. I didn't know what I was going to do, I'm no doctor, I had no idea how to help, but I could not be near him after what I'd watched. He looked up at me. Up close he looked even younger than he had at his post. Just a kid, really. His face was streaked with grime and there was blood at his hairline where the hat had been, and his eyes were wide and bright with shock, but he was there, he was present, he found my face and held on to it. And do you know what he said? He said, "Is he all right? Is the boy all right?" That's all. That was the whole of it. A man on his knees in the wreckage of a morning, hurt, breathing like every breath cost him something, and the only thing he wanted to know was whether the child was all right. I told him yes. I told him the boy was all right. I told him I'd seen it, I'd watched the whole thing, the boy was breathing, the boy was crying, the boy was fine. And he closed his eyes, and he let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere right at the bottom of him, and his whole body sort of sagged, the last of the strength going out of it now that the question was answered, now that he knew, and people caught him and laid him gently back on the grass, and somebody was already shouting for the medics. I'll tell you something. I've thought about a lot of moments from that day, but that's the one. That's the one I keep. Not the running, not the blast, not even the coffee. It's a hurt young man on the grass asking after a child he'd never met before he'd let himself ask after anything for himself. The mother. You've been wondering, I was too. She wasn't dead. I'll tell you that now because I made you carry it through 2 parts, and that's long enough. The first blast had knocked her down and away from the pram, knocked her clean off her feet, and she'd come up dazed and turned around and lost in the smoke, screaming for her boy in a part of the crowd that wasn't where her boy was. The crush had carried her one way while the boy stood frozen the other. It happens in seconds. It happens faster than you'd believe. They found each other maybe 10 minutes later. I saw it. By then the medics had come, and the area was filling up with people in uniform, police, paramedics, men in heavier gear moving fast and shouting to each other. And somewhere in all of that, a woman came running across the green with a cut over one eye and her clothes torn and a face I will never forget. And a stranger was carrying a small boy toward her, and the two of them came together like the rest of the world had stopped existing. She went down on her knees with him, folded right around him, and she made a sound I've never heard a human being make before or since. Not a scream, not a cry, something older than both, something that came from a place words can't reach. She held him and rocked him and pressed her face into his hair, and she couldn't speak. She just made that sound over and over while the boy's little arms went around her neck. And then a stranger near her, one of the people who'd seen it all, leaned down and told her how the boy had gotten out, told her about the guard, pointed across the green to where they were loading a stretcher. I watched her look up. I watched her find him with her eyes, and I watched her understand. I lost track of the guard after they took him away. That's the truth of these things, they're not films, they don't end clean. The camera doesn't hold on the hero's face while the music swells. They put him on a stretcher and they took him through the trees to where the ambulances were, and the smoke and the sirens swallowed him up, and that was that. I stood there on the grass not knowing his name, not knowing if he'd live, knowing only what I'd seen. It was hours before they let any of us leave. They moved us back, cordoned the whole green off, and we stood behind tape in little shocked clusters and gave our names and our accounts to police, who wrote them down with hands that were steadier than mine. I told the story I've just told you. The young officer who took it down stopped writing at one point and looked up at me and said, quietly, "We've had a few people mention the guard." And something in the way she said it made my throat close up, because it meant other people had seen it too. It meant I hadn't dreamed it. It meant the thing I'd watched was real and was already becoming the thing people would remember. I'll tell you what they decided in the end, the people whose job it is to decide such things. 2 devices. The first, the larger, near the road. The second meant for exactly what it did, to catch the people running, to catch the helpers, to turn one terrible thing into 2. They caught the ones responsible eventually. That part was in all the papers. I won't dwell on them. They don't deserve another second of this story. This was never about them. What I'll dwell on is the number. Because there's a number the investigators put together later, an estimate, the kind of grim mathematics these people do, how many were in that crush at the railings, how fast it was turning, how close it came. And the number of people who, in their best judgment, did not die that morning, because one man left his post when he wasn't supposed to and turned a panicking crowd in the right direction with nothing but his voice and his hands. It was a lot of people. More than you'd think one young man could be responsible for, more than I can comfortably hold in my head, and not one of them will ever know it was him. They got out, they got home, they hugged their own children that night a little harder than usual, and they never knew that the reason they got to do that was a soldier with a coffee stain on his chest. Now, the man in the green jacket. I haven't forgotten him. I bet you haven't either. The fool with the coffee who started this whole story off, who threw a warm drink at a man for a laugh an hour before that man ran into a bomb site for a stranger's child. I saw him again, just once in the aftermath behind the tape. He was sitting on the curb with a foil blanket around his shoulders, the kind the medics give you for shock. His sunglasses were gone. The swagger was gone. The friends were gone, scattered, or just standing apart, I don't know. He was just a man on a curb with his face in his hands, shaking. I don't know how much he saw. I don't know if he saw the running, the boy, the second blast, the stretcher. I'd like to think he did. I'd like to think he sat on that curb and put it together, that the man he'd humiliated for a cheap laugh was the same man who'd run toward the thing that nearly killed them all. That the discipline he'd mocked, the stillness he'd found so funny, the not reacting he'd treated like a party trick, that all of it was the same thing. The same iron, the same refusal to fall apart. He'd seen one side of it and laughed, and then he'd seen the other side of it save lives. I didn't go over to him. I thought about it. I thought about saying something, I don't even know what. In the end, I just looked at him for a moment, and he must have felt it because he looked up and our eyes met, and I saw on his face the thing I'd come to say without my having to say it. He knew. Whatever else he didn't know, he knew that. I never saw him again after that. I've often wondered what kind of man he became, whether a morning like that changes you for good, or whether you let it slide off you like the coffee slid off that tunic. I'd like to believe it changed him. I'd like to believe that somewhere out there is a man who has never once, in all the years since, made a joke at a guard's expense, because he knows now what's standing inside that uniform. I'd like to believe that. I'll never know. I found out the guard lived. Months later. I'd gone home by then, back across the water, back to my small, ordinary life, and I'd carried that morning around inside me like a stone the whole time, not knowing the end of it, not knowing if the young man on the grass had made it. And then one day I read it. Just a small thing, tucked away, a recognition, an honor, the kind of formal words a country uses when it wants to say thank you to someone who deserves far more than words. And it named him. And it said he'd recovered. And I sat in my kitchen with the paper in my hands, and I cried like I hadn't cried since the morning itself. He'd lived. The boy he saved had lived. The mother had her son. Hundreds of people who never knew his name had gone home to their families. And the young man who made all of that true had lived to walk out of that hospital on his own 2 feet. I never met him. I want you to know that. I've told this story dozens of times, and people always assume there's a part where I shake his hand, where he tells me his side of it, where we become friends for life. There isn't. I was just a stranger in a crowd. To him, I was one face among the thousands he protected without knowing it. He has no idea I exist. He has no idea anyone's been telling his story for years to anyone who will sit still long enough to hear it. But I exist because of choices people like him make. And so do you, probably more times than you'll ever know. The world is held up quietly by people who do the hard right thing in the half-second when no one would blame them for doing the easy wrong one. Most of the time we never see it. That morning, I got to see it. That's the whole gift of the worst day of my life. I got to see it. So here's what I think about when I think about that day. I think about a tourist who threw coffee at a man for a laugh, and 1,000 phones that filmed it, and how that's the part that would have gone around the world if nothing else had happened. Tourist throws coffee at Royal Guard. A funny little 30-second clip. People would have watched it and chuckled and scrolled on and never thought about the man inside the uniform at all. And I think about how the same man, an hour later, ran into fire for a child who wasn't his, took a blast on his own back so a 4-year-old wouldn't feel it, and how almost no one filmed that. Because when it's real, when it actually matters, the phones go down and the people run. We laugh at the still ones. We poke at them. We wave our hands in their faces. We treat them like they're part of the scenery, like they're not quite real. And then a morning comes along that strips everything back to what it actually is, and we find out what was standing there all along, behind the funny hat and the perfect stillness. It was never a man who couldn't move. It was a man who wouldn't right up until the moment that moving was the only thing left worth doing. And when that moment came, he was the first to go and the last to think of himself. I think about that every time I see one of those clips now. The coffee, the crowds, the silly faces. And I want to reach through the screen and tell every single person laughing the same thing I'll tell you now. The thing I learned standing on a green in London on the worst and most important morning of my life. You have no idea who you're looking at. You never do.